Alright, so now I got my bearings out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean them real quick with rubbing alcohol. I've actually already cleaned them once, but I'm going to clean them again this time with gloves. So that way I don't get any finger oil on them. And then I'm going to put them into the block. Now, as you're putting these bearings in, make sure that you put the bearings that have the holes on them on the actual block, and the ones that do not have holes on them on the cradle. There's 4 bearings total, 4 go on the cradle, 4 go on the block. When you're looking at those 4 bearings, they're usually wrapped separately. There's one that has a flange on it. The one that has a flange on it will go towards the rear of the motor. The ones that are skinny will go in the middle on these middle 2, and then the one that's kind of medium sized will go in the front. There's actually little grooves. Not sure if you can see this. There's little grooves there. Those grooves will line up with the grooves in the cradle and the block. So if you're looking at the service manual, it's actually going to tell you that the preferred method for measuring the clearance between the crank and the bearings is a dial indicator. I don't have one, so we're using the alternate method, which is the plastic gauge. Now, I think technically it's probably safe to assume that the clearances are good because no material was taken out of the crank, and these are standard bearings, and you know the crank is a standard size, so it should fit. But just for my own sanity and peace of mind, I'm going to check it. So right now I'm just cleaning off the crank with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on all the bearing surfaces. So now we're going to throw the studs in. I'm just going to put a little bit of ARP fastener lubricant on the threads, just a tiny bit. And if you look on the ARP studs, there's two sides. One's got an Allen. Just make sure that one's going up. Alright, so I've got my studs in, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take plastic gauge and I'm going to put a little piece of it on the bearing surface so that way we can measure it. Now, there's a bunch of different things that you could check on the crank, right? There's the main rods, which is what we're doing now. Now the clearance, and I've pulled it straight from the service manual, the clearance for the crank is going to be 0.028 to 0.055 millimeters. And I've got this plastic gauge. It's the SPG-1 for measuring that. So if you make sure you get the SPG-1, which I got the kit that comes with all 3, I'm pretty sure it has all the sizes we need here. You're good to measure that as well as the rod. Now, there's 2 spots you can measure on the rod. There's a big hole and a little hole. We are going to be measuring the big hole, which is 0.028 to 0.048, which again pulled it straight from the manual. We can use the same plastic gauge to do that one. There is also a measurement for the small hole, but we're not going to do that because I'm assuming that we're not going to do that because I'm pretty confident that the clearance is going to be good since they're brand new rods and brand new pistons. I know everything is gonna fit perfect. So all we're gonna do is take a little tiny piece of inside this paper. There's like a little green stuff in there, a little green line. We're just gonna cut a little piece of it off and stick it on the bearing to measure it. So I'll try to see if we can focus in on that. See that little green line? So we'll just cut a little piece of it, put it on the bearing surface, right across that way, so that way we can measure it. When we put the girdle on, put the bolts on, we're going to torque it down to 70 foot-pounds, but we're going to do it in stages. So we'll start maybe at like 20, 40, and then like 60, and then 70 foot-pounds, and we'll do it in a pattern. So per the manual, it says that you got to go, and you're probably better off looking at this yourself, but there, yeah, there it is right there. So that's the pattern in which we got to torque them down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the front of the motor. So we'll follow that pattern as we torque it down 70 foot-pounds. Alright, so just a couple things I want to point out. I got the cradle tightened down. I'm gonna let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna take it off in reverse of the way that I put it back on. Right, so just slowly untorquing, starting from the middle, working my way out. I do want to point out one mistake that I made. So check out the arrow. Right, make sure that thing is facing to the front. I accidentally, when I was loading up the bearings, I put one of the bearings in the wrong place, and I actually tried to put the cradle on backwards, but I fixed it. And then another thing too I want to point out is these nuts and these bolts are kind of a weird size. So the Allen head is a 4.5 millimeter Allen head, and then this nut is a 16 millimeter socket. So make sure you have those two sizes. Those aren't sizes that I typically use. I mean, I had them luckily, and again, I didn't torque down the Allen bolts. I just kind of tightened them a little bit, but I did torque down the nuts. All right, so got the cradle pulled off. You can see there's the plastic gauge got squished down on the crank there. Can't really see that one, but it's there, just barely. I don't know if you can see that. But you can see it really good on the bearings on the crank, and so that's what I'm gonna use to measure off of. Squished them pretty good, right? So all you gotta do is take your little gauge. Again, the clearance that it needs to be for the crank is gonna be 0.28 to 0.055. Hold this little gauge on there, measure it. I would say pretty close to 0.038. So, you know, well within spec, looking pretty good. I don't think we really need to do a whole lot there. Same thing with this here. This one might be a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner, so maybe close to 0.051, but still within spec. So this one again, 0.051, pretty dang close. This one again, 0.051, maybe a little bit bigger. Maybe we can call that one 0.038. And this one, I would probably call that one 0.038. So all of them looking pretty good within that spec. Once again, 0.028 to 0.055, pulled straight from the service manual. So now what I'm going to do, now that I'm pretty confident, I'm going to clean all that crap off of there. I'm going to pull the crank out, and then we'll put the oil squirters and the little plates in there next. Alright, so I got the crank out and I cleaned it up again. The one thing that I saw on almost all the engine build videos was make sure you keep everything super duper clean, and all the people I talked to that had ever built an engine said to make sure you keep everything really, really clean. So I went through, I cleaned the bearing surfaces again that are in there. I cleaned the ones on the crank. I cleaned off the plastic gauge. I ended up using the parts cleaner to get it off. It dissolved it, and then I immediately wiped it with alcohol afterwards. So make alcohol your best friend. And again, before I put the crank back in, I will clean it to make sure, you know, every single bearing surface is spotless. All right, so now we're going to put the stuff that goes inside the bottom of the motor before you can put the crank in permanently. I'll show you what that is. So it consists of these plates and these 3 oil squirters. So these 3 oil squirters. I'll show you where those go real quick. So the oil squirters are going to bolt down here, right there, facing the back of the piston, which is not in there now, but you know, this motor's upside down, so if we're right side up, they squirt up, but right now they're gonna be pointing downward. And then the plates go, one plate goes here, and another plate goes here, and I think it just is to like block oil from splashing up in there. Now, I didn't see torque specs anywhere for these, but I'm just going to torque them what I think is appropriate, probably like 12, 15 foot-pounds. And then I also, I went out and picked up some new washers. So you can get these from, I think I got these from Lowe's. They're stainless steel split washers, 6mm stainless steel. If you look at some of the washers, like, you don't want to put a washer like this back in because it's like flattened out. Not sure if you can see that, but it's like completely flat. Some of these probably still okay, like this still has a freaking bend to it, so that one's good. But I think almost all the oil squirter ones were flattened out, so I want to replace those with these. Should work good. And then with the oil squirters, again, just make sure you confirm that they work good, that the valve in there springs up and down, and clean the jets out nice and good. And then also keep in mind there needs to be a washer, a little washer that goes on there. And if you got the rebuild kit, here's my engine rebuild kit. I don't think I've shown this yet. You know, I'm kind of surprised they just throw a bunch of crap in a box. But if you look right here, it says gasket oil jet. That's the part number right there. 3 of them come in a box, and they're just like these little tiny paper washers. They don't really look that special. So I'm going to throw those on there. I'm also going to use the 263 Loctite to tighten them down. Oh yeah, and let me just show you the fastener assembly lubricant that I'm using, ARP, and I'm also going to be using this assembly lube on the bearings. So, all right, here we go. Alright, so got all that stuff installed. I think I said, what, like 12 or something foot-pounds, but I just kind of gave it a ooga-dooga like one hand. I didn't use the torque wrench, so if you want to be exact, maybe look up whatever the torque specs, max torque spec for a M6x1 is. I think it's probably less than 10. 12 might be too much. But again, put the red thread locker on there, put the plates in there. Now I'm going to do one final clean of these bearings and the crankshaft. Give them one good clean, and then I'm going to put the assembly lube on the bearings and then throw them in. My phone's about to die, so I'm going to have to put it on a charger so I can record some more, so there might be a little spot missing, but I'll fill you in. Alright, so I got the crank in, bolted down, torqued all the way. I didn't record it because my battery died. But just make sure, again, you tighten it down in stages. And then an additional thing is put the assembly lube on the bearings, put a nice generous helping. And then as you torque it down in stages, just make sure that it turns, right? Make sure it continues to turn, make sure it doesn't bind up at any time. So this thing turns nice and beautiful. Came out pretty good.